So welcome to everyone. I'll just give a brief outline of what we're going to do within our limited time. My name is Peter Plant, and I'm talking to you from Denmark, as it were, where we have a heavy thunderstorm just now. So I'm relying on my connections to hold. Our program is like this. I'll give a brief introduction. So you'll hear Peter Plant speaking for about 10 minutes. And then after that, we get a message from Canada. This is Stefania Maggi, will actually talk us into career education and with a twist, which I'm sure you will appreciate. We'll later on hear from Tristan Hooley, who's also with us today. He's been working on the CDI framework. I'm sure most of you will be familiar with that. But he'll actually say a few words about that. And then we have a question and answer period. Behind all this, of course, is Lynn Barham, and she'll monitor and facilitate this particular part, the question and answer period. And then we'll finish off with David Morgan. We'll have a bit of a conversation at the end, a real CDI conversation. So that's the main idea here. The people behind this, you'll meet most of them, but one very important person in all this is in fact Lynn Barham, who so modestly is in the background, but she's actually one of the pioneers of what we're going to talk about today. I noticed that I had a speech in Canada on green guidance in 1996, and Lynn Barham, with other people, actually wrote an article also in 1996. So we're 25 years into a green guidance of some sort. So thank you very much, Lynn, for carrying the torch for 25 years together with the rest of us. What's interesting, in fact, is that what was in the beginning seen as sort of it was pioneering, of course, to actually think along these lines, and we'll unfold green guidance as a concept as we go along. But it was also seen as quite extreme. It questioning free choice. It was seen as very radical and far-fetched, in fact. And it's interesting to see that what was extreme in those days is now mainstream. We've really moved quite a bit since then. We have, people and institutions working with ESD, Education for Sustainable Development. I've seen whole countries. I was virtually in Ireland the other day, and they've moved quite well forward in respect. So we've whole national movements now in the direction of mainstreaming green aspects of career choices and career development. And of course, the United Nations with its 17 sustainability goals. So I'm sure you're familiar with this, but it's interesting to see that this is in fact what's been known as the career industry, the career guidance industry, catching up. And it's taken a while to do that. I thought I'd just dwell a little bit on this notion of industry. I know it's particular to the English and British language, but it's interesting to see how we've been linked up with industry as a concept over the years. In fact, you could claim that career guidance is an offspring of the Industrial Revolution. This is when people actually specialized to a degree where they needed some career guidance. And our early forefathers in this respect, Charles Fourier, Richard Owen and Frank Parsons, all had different responses to this new industrial era, and they thought along lines of career development and career guidance. But we've been part of this industrial thinking for quite a while, and it's interesting to see how we've been carrying this almost unconsciously along. So we have a heavy load, and perhaps also a blind spot here, that we're so much part and parcel of industrial thinking. So now I think it's the time to think along other lines, perhaps even think in terms of paradigm shift. And if we look towards our clients and what they think, these are the days of Greta Thunberg, our Swedish colleague in this field. It's quite obvious that younger people are thinking along different lines in terms of careers. Young people have always perhaps felt that they needed to make career choices which would have an impact on the world and those kinds of things. But now it seems as if it's much more important. We've just had a Danish study on this, and the good old concept of interests seems to be now mixed up with many other aspects of career choice factors. And one of the most important one was, I want to make an impact in terms of climate change. So this is a report that came out today, and it's just one example of many. Even high pay and prestigious jobs came two and second and third in these terms. So now's the time to go green, and our clients and customers demand this, and I think the planet deserves it. And it's interesting to see how in recent times green guidance and sustainability issues have also been linked with social justice issues, and I'm sure that Tristan will want to dwell on that as well. So the two go together hand in hand. So this seminar that we have today is very timely, and I would say, without being too impatient, it's been timely for about 25 years. It's our 25th anniversary in this respect, and it's time that our professional response to our clients also includes sustainability aspects. I think it is really an important time, and I think it's an open window just now. And if we think of some of our activities in terms of career development and career guidance, I would probably point to career education as an obvious way to actually make career guidance activities even more relevant than they have been. Adding a green aspect, a sustainability aspect to career education, in my view, makes it even more relevant than it has been over the years. So without too much further ado, this was meant to be a little bit of an introduction to the area. I didn't want to dwell too much on a lot of different aspects, but just to mention that this is all very timely, and that we'll hear from people who have been working on different types of issues, different issues within this field. The first speaker will be Stefania Maggi from Canada. You've been interested in this field from sort of an interesting point of view, which is human rights, children's rights point of view. And you didn't actually start off by being a careers education or careers guidance person, but you've actually moved into this field. And I think that makes it even more important and even more interesting for us. So I'm looking very much forward to the next 15 minutes or so, where you'll make a presentation, taking your depart from your part of thinking here, but also linking it with career education. So the floor is yours, Stefania.
Thank you. Thank you and welcome everyone. I'm just curious to know who the audience is today. I was told it's a mix of professionals and researchers. So I wonder if you guys know how to use the raise hand function. And if I can get a sense of how many of you are actually professionals working with clients on career guidance and career development. Okay. Quite a few of you, I wouldn't say exactly half, but close to half. And how many in the room are researchers in the field of career development and career guidance? Not as many. Well, I'd say maybe a good third. And the rest, let's see, maybe policymakers. Anyone who works in policy development. A few. That's a good diverse group of people. I'm excited because this is a topic I'm very passionate about. I love to talk about it. And like Peter mentioned, I come at it from, I would say, not a very conventional way. I didn't start off being interested in career counseling or career guidance. In my career, actually, I am an interdisciplinary scholar. I specialized in epidemiology and developmental psychology. And I've been interested in the well-being of young people from a population perspective. So I look at group of children and youth together. That's my unit of interest. I've come to being interested in climate change, I'd say maybe about 5-6 years ago in my career, at a time when, as a psychologist, because I'm also a climate change psychologist, I was seeing what was out there in terms of the public discourses, and there wasn't a lot of talk about emotions and the psychological underpinnings of climate change. So I started being interested in all those aspects of how climate change is impacting on us as individuals and social beings beyond the physical and environmental sciences. And like Peter mentioned, I'm also a child rights advocate. And this combination of what I've learned about approaches in career development with the situation of climate change have been really interesting for me, because it comes down to a lot of contradictory information or contradictory practices that we have around our children that are very disempowering. So I decided to try and put all my different perspectives together in a coherent way, because seemingly we're all over the place, but in the end, they're very much interconnected. So what I want to do today with you, I'm going to do share screen, see if that works. Just give me a second. Can you see my screen?
Yes, that's fine.
Perfect. So today what I would like to do is to give you a bit of my reading of what are the challenges that we're facing in the career development world. Then I will spend a few words on why I think that climate change offers the career guidance and development offer perhaps our best hope in tackling climate change. And then I'll give you some examples of a program I developed that tries to address this topic of career guidance in the context of climate change. And in the end, I propose some suggestions for you if you want to start bringing your practice more towards kind of a green guidance model. So starting off, what do I see the challenges being today for career development? Disruptors is one of the big themes in career development over history. Actually, they've been there all the time, but we live at a time where these disruptors are even bigger and more pervasive, and they're very fast. They change things very fast. We had the example of the pandemic that is dramatically transforming the world of jobs. Climate change before that was gradually leading to a big transformation, and technological innovations are changing also very, very drastically the way that we think about jobs and how we carry out jobs. So these are just examples of disruptors. As the disruptors play their influences on us, they are working in a context of very old organizational, social, health, and educational systems. Peter hinted at that when he said that a lot of the ways of working are derived from the Industrial Revolution. The educational system is one of those. It was created to prepare people essentially to fit certain careers or certain jobs that were in the society at the time. Now, sociology and educational research, psychological research, lots of studies in social sciences have demonstrated that these systems are dysfunctional. And in fact, they have been leading to a big problem we have today, which is my third point, which is that young people are very ill prepared to make it in a changing world like today. So schools are definitely not the place where kids learn how to make it through and succeed in life. Career development also starts too late. Oftentimes, and now this is changing. I know, for example, I don't know all the curricula in the UK where you're located, but in Canada, there's been a big shift in curricula around career development, where you see implementation of a really lifelong journey where you have career development themes appearing in kindergarten and then changing as the young person evolves and adapts to the stages and the ages of children. But what happens is that regardless of this, we see that the policies that we have that are brilliant, they're beautiful, very well based on science, when they get implemented, they get totally lost in lack of adequate support. And also they tend to be not accessible equally. So it's an equity issue. Not all children and youth have equal access to career development resources. So there's still huge gaps in terms of who gets advice and who doesn't. And also it's very skewed into the later educational years, like the high school years. And from a developmental perspective, we all know how the first, the preschool years, how critical they are in determining all those attitudes, beliefs, self-beliefs, self-esteem, sense of efficacy, and so on, that are fundamental for a successful career trajectory throughout life later. So the reason that I have a question up there, who's responsible for career development, is also something that emerges as a challenge in my reading of the field, because the literature shows that parents really think that career development is it's a responsibility of the school. So they're waiting for the time when children are in school to even talk about the topic or address it in a more aware way with their children. While we also know that career development starts in the preschool years, like I mentioned, so the responsibility should not be only on the school, but should be in a partnership between the industry, schools, parents, and the community, so that the whole idea of career development is embedded in the life of children as a whole, not segregated from other aspects of their lives. So the last big question I had there is, why do we have careers in the first place anyway? Again, this is my reading as I would say, somewhat an external to the world of career development. But I get a feeling by reading the theories and the practices is that there's been a big emphasis on individual career, something that is for the individual to engage in, reflect on, and create for themselves. And the connections with how that trajectory ties to that of other people around the individuals are not as emphasized as I think they could be. So if we created careers in the first place to make the world go around, to improve human conditions, and in times of crisis, careers exist to help us solve these big problems, then we need to reframe the way we address career development as a more of a collective exercise than just an individualistic one. Climate change obviously is one of these big crises we're living through. We could talk about the pandemic, but and in many ways, climate change and the pandemic share so many similarities in terms of the psychological mechanisms that bring up in people. But let's focus on climate change. We're talking about green guidance. So why do I think career guidance for kids is our best hope for climate change? I'm going to put out two thoughts that I have. I think that in the first place, we've been thinking about climate change too narrowly, It's changing now. We're shifting to acknowledge the full complexity of this crisis. But up until recently, climate change, we were thinking about climate change as a earth sciences and environmental problem, while it really touches every single aspect of our life. It touches on the way that we perceive the world around us, the physical world, the social world. It touches on how we relate to each other, not just as human beings, but each other and ourselves with nature and the natural environment. It impacts on the whole social structure of our societies. It's been undermined in many places because of migration, mass migration that's happening, forced migration because of climate crisis. It exacerbates a lot of systemic issues that we had present in our world, but they were not in our faces as now, like all the division, all the racism, all the discriminant behaviors towards what is other now are exacerbated because of this mass migration, and we are more forced to live more together. It's a global issue that really touches every single part of our life. So it's a good thing we're changing the way we think. We are just at the beginning of that acknowledgement. And also in combination with that, we've been thinking about career development, like I mentioned in my previous slide, a little bit with a focus on the individual. So what I argue is that young people can discover what careers they're interested in. So we start from an individual standpoint so that the person can get really to discover for themselves what matters to them. But then the next step is also to teach them how their professional choices will make this planet healthier. So there's a little bit of an extra step into the guidance that green guidance requires, which is that reflection on how individual choices impact on the collective and the well-being of the planet. So a little bit around the lines of promoting social responsibility through career development. Also, let's not forget that as human beings, we have foundational needs. And one of these needs are sense of belonging. That is one of the biggest challenges that young people are facing today, because they do not feel that they belong. They feel isolated, disconnected, and they're lacking that grounding, that sense of belonging to a community or to something bigger than themselves. So what career development with a social responsibility twist can offer is that sense of belonging to something bigger than themselves, and give them better or greater purpose for their own career trajectories. Also, we have, as human beings, because we are social beings, we have a desire. I say it's innate, it's probably not, but I like to think that each of us have a desire to make a difference. And oftentimes we are socialized out of that desire. We become centered on ourselves and isolate our needs from the ones of others. So we tend to become a bit more selfish. But we do have that desire to make a difference. And what has emerged from some studies, European and North American studies, is that young people feel that they want to make a difference, and this is the child rights part of my work, but they feel totally marginalized, because we live in an adult-centric society where we look at young people with a condescending approach, where we say, you guys are the future, but then we don't enable them enough to take charge of their future, because deep down, we don't think they're competent. So we kind of send these mixed messages to young people that are incredibly disempowering and are very much part of the sense of confusion and frustration that they feel around climate change. Peter mentioned Greta, who did a tremendous work in bringing voices of youth out. And herself, she took a pause and said, okay, let's take a look. How big of an impact have all this past year or two of activism had on decision making? And sadly, she came to the conclusion that nothing, zero, has changed in terms of significant impact on policy and decision making, because we're all happy and supportive of kids speaking up. But then when it's a time to actually listen to them, we don't listen. And that's, like I said, brings a lot of, it has a negative impact on the mental well-being of young people.
This is the timekeeper.
So why?
You've got another 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'm almost done. So bringing all these things together with career development, through the lens of climate change, I developed a program, and I can spend a lot of time talking about it. I can do it in a different setting, but what I just give you some highlights of it, just to give you a sense that when we talk about climate change and career development, you don't have to think narrowly of a handful of careers that might appeal to young people. You can think of virtually every single job that you can think of as a green job. The goal there, the challenge there is for educators, career guidance, and policymakers who are guiding children through, or young people through, the process of figuring out what they want, is then to create that connection for the young people. Once they've identified what they want to do, help them make that connection to how their profession of choice can impact the environment for the better. We did this program with young, let's say, high school students, where you ask them to identify and describe and catalog 100 jobs that relate to the environment, either help adapt to or mitigate. And we went well over to the 100. Actually, I think I've cataloged around 150 careers that I could share at one point in terms of the reasoning why are these careers related to climate change. So let me go quickly to the last slide, because I think this is the most important one for you if you're considering to make climate change, integrate climate change into your practice. I have 5 suggestions. The first one is really to change the way you think, and they're not necessarily in any order. Change the way you think. Don't think of career guidance as an exercise or something that you have to guide an individual separate from the world around them. It's much more of the thinking of each individual being a unique piece of this collective puzzle. That changes the way that we actually address career guidance, and it changes the language that we use in that context. So when you use that language that is more on the collective and less on the individual, you will be able to communicate that sense of purpose, that the career that the individual is going to engage in is actually, it's part of a larger social and global community. Also, focus your career guidance on current relevant problems that personally mean something to your clients, rather than job titles and salary scales. And this is very important because, especially now, with the world of jobs in such flux and change, jobs are, you can define your own job if you want to. You can invent your own job if you want to. You don't have to stick to predetermined career paths the way we see them currently, because there's a lot of latitude for inventing your own career. And that's really important for young people to know. So that's one advice I would have. Do not introduce climate change too early in the process. I think is a very important thing to consider. Remember, what you want is that the young person identifies what they really want, truly. If the environment is not explicitly what they care about, that's fine. You go with the flow, you follow their lead. Once they made their choice about what they want to do, then it's you who have to make that connection with them and for them, so that the link will become more explicit, which means that you need to educate yourself on the complexity of the climate change topic, so that you will have that content knowledge, that understanding, that will allow you to make those links for the young person. I think my time is up, Peter, is it? So I'll stop here, but I'd be very happy to have discussions and questions anytime it's appropriate for the meeting.
Thanks very much. We will have an opportunity to do that a bit later on. And thanks very much for opening this window of opportunity. That's what I hear, that we have a unique position just now. I think we'll just move on to Tristan. You have another 20 minutes here, Tristan, roughly. And you've been working on the, I think it's almost a redevelopment of the CDI framework. And we'll get it today presented by you. You've been working with the development of this and giving it a green twist. Tristan, over to you.
Yes, that's right. I'm going to just kind of set a bit of context. I mean, a lot of what I'm going to say, I think, is going to really echo with what Stefania said. So, I mean, I think at the moment we hardly really need to make the case, you know, the sea's been on fire. So I think it might just be time for us to do something about the environment, really. I mean, I've got some data, I mean, it's familiar data here, which tells you that temperatures have been rising, and they've been rising over a fairly short period of time, you know, in a very worrying way. And all of the evidence tells us that this is happening, it's going to keep on happening, and it's going to create big problems for people. So, but I think one point that I'm always keen to make when I talk about the environment is that the environment is not just about these big picture things around climate data and so on. The environment is where we live. It's where we have our careers. It's where we interact with each other. And so when we're talking about improving the environment for people, yes, we're talking about the big picture, but we're also talking about a lot of small things. So, you know, rubbish overwhelming an area creates environmental problems. You know, and these things all link together, and we have issues with air pollution and so on. So the environment is not just climate change. Climate change is the most pressing need, but it may not be the way that everybody encounters these issues. And this is a picture from Sao Paulo, and it shows you, I mean, you know, when we talk about the environment and we talk about climate change, one of the tempting things is to say, well, you know, there's no plan B, we're all in it together, we're all in the same boat. And of course, that's true to some extent. You know, if we end up in a situation where, you know, the seas rise, where the temperature goes up, then it will be bad for everyone. But it will also be worse for some people. And the way that these play out, class is an issue. You know, all sorts of other diversity characteristics are an issue, and particularly north-south divides are an issue. And you can see it kind of really sharply here. In Sao Paulo, where on one side of the wall, you've got this kind of hugely compact slum dwellings, no green to be seen at all. On the other side, you've got this beautiful tennis courts and trees and people having plants on their balconies and so on. So, you know, when we're talking about environment, we're not just, of course it's a global problem, but it's also, the question is, whose environment are we talking about, and how are we going to help a greater number of people to get access to a good environment? And I was asked to say something about employers. So I'm just going to say this very quickly. I mean, one of the things that we can say if we think about employers' practice is some of the most obvious things have been an incredibly negative impact on the environment. So, you know, we've seen lots of corporations actively kind of campaigning to deny climate change and so on. And so that's a reality that I think people have to engage with when they're thinking about which organization to work for and so on. I found a survey from Deloitte of chief financial officers, and they basically say most corporations, most kind of medium to large size organizations are not seriously thinking about climate change. They don't really understand it. They're focusing on things that are basically ways to save costs. You know, this is not what their kind of primary drivers are. So We've then got various strategies that you get from businesses and employers. So it ranges from kind of very deep green approaches where you've got employers that are genuinely very committed to environmental change, many of which their businesses are actually bound up with it, through to kind of arguments around sustainable business. And then what we see in lots of organizations is kind of green initiatives, so positive things that might be helpful, but probably not of the scale to really make the difference that we need. We then also see what's often called greenwash, so companies kind of claiming that they've got a positive, so British Petroleum, BP, now calls itself Beyond Petroleum. So, how much is that a real commitment? We have to worry about these ideas of greenwash. We also see companies engaged in climate change denial and then actively lobbying against policies. So I learned this phrase today, so I've put it in, which is watermelon policies, which is the idea that green policies are just a kind of disguise for communism, essentially. What we're doing when we're talking about green things is bringing in state regulations and so on. And so companies should be arguing against this. Now, all of these are different strategies, and you'll find within a single firm, many of these things might overlap. And it's important to also recognize they're framed by government policy and regulation and by public opinion and the media. And these things shape the way that particular organizations behave. In terms of the kind of HR implications of that, there is some interest in ideas like environmental intelligence. So the idea that sort of the individuals or employees should have some capability to think green and understand green issues. But this is really quite an emergent idea. And to be honest, and I've done quite a bit of work, particularly on early career recruitment, and I can't find anybody really recruiting seriously for this as an issue. So what we can say is that, there are problems in the way. So if we're thinking about employers are not leading this challenge, they're not leading society's fights against many of these challenges, and they may actually be contributing to it. And that's the argument that Kate Aronoff makes in her book, which is called Overheated and How Capitalism Broke the Planet. And one of her kind of central arguments is that what a lot of corporations have done is shift responsibility for that shift responsibility for sustainability to being something that's about how we consume as individuals. So these ideas of the sort of sustainability footprint, carbon footprints, these kind of ideas that move the responsibility away from the organization and move them on to the individual. And this essentially does the role of what's sometimes called responsibilization. So sort of pushing the responsibility onto the individual away from organizations, away from systems, away from politics, and saying, well, if you want to be green, then you be green, that's fine. But don't make everyone else do that. Now, of course, we're now in a position where that is changing quite a lot, and people are starting to see systemic reasons for this. And so we're seeing a lot of challenge to this idea that environmentalism or sustainability is an individual choice. And if you want a kind of theoretical underpinning to this, there's a very good book that I've read, which is called What on Earth is to be Done. And it basically makes the point that any kind of commitment to sort of social justice has got to be bound up with the environment. Because you can't have a wonderful sort of socially just world if the planet's burning. But equally, the other way around, anything that's serious about dealing with environmental problems has got to have a sort of social justice commitment. It's got to look at systemic issues and so on. We're now seeing some of that actually happening in practice. So we've got things like the Green New Deal that's being talked about a lot, which really foregrounds a sort of systemic approach. But it also returns us to the politics of production rather than consumption. And this re-engages us with ideas around work and career. And it's why work and career is so important. What they're doing in the Green New Deal is saying, when you're getting engaged with sustainability, it's not just about you having a worse life by, you know, eating tofu all the time or whatever it is that we might caricature as people being interested in green politics. It's actually, if we organize this right, our response to environmental crisis could give us all a better life. You know, if we manage our response to this, it could give us all a better life. It could give you access to a better job. You know, we need to retool the economy. And then you start to think, well, what kind of jobs are these going to be? Where are they going to be? Who's going to be doing them? And you get inevitably quite quickly back to career guidance as a way to help people to figure this out. So career is important because it's the way that we relate to the world around us. It's not just an individual thing. It's about how we interact with other people, how we interact with systems, and how we interact with the natural environment and the planet we live on. So when we're talking about this green guidance thing that Peter really pioneered this term, we're not just talking about people choosing a green job. We're talking about a kind of thinking about how we might change the economy, how we might change the labour market in a way that actually might enable us to create a genuinely sustainable planet. And that links to some of the work that I've been doing with Ronald Sultana, Rhea Thompson, and many others on career guidance and social justice, where we emphasize some of these systemic factors, we emphasize some of the collective factors and so on. But we haven't said enough in this work about green issues, and it is a problem. I mean, we've got our website there. I just looked at the times we've talked about green guidance, and you know, we need to say more about it. There's much more to do here. So what on earth is to be done in career guidance? Well, there's lots and lots of things. There's lots of room for lots of ideas here. We'll probably talk about many of them today. But, you know, one of the things that I'm interested in particularly is schools and young people. And I think there's a lot of space to do that. Peter's already talked about Greta Thunberg, and we've got here, this is from my city, my kids are involved in this, and this is the kind of climate strike movement in Leicester, and all of the things that they're doing. So that's, young people are already finding their way to these things, but how do we bring this into schools and into the careers curriculum? Well, the CDI framework that we reworked over the last 6 months or year or so is an attempt to set out essentially a careers curriculum for schools in England, and it says what sort of things should you cover, and it says, well, that young people should have the opportunity to think about how they develop and grow throughout life. They should look at possibilities that are out there. They should think about how they actively manage their careers and create opportunities, how they balance life and work, and how they see the big picture. So the relationship between the big picture issues and the kind of nature, the day-to-day decisions about their career and their choices. And we're trying to kind of carry a lot of different ideas in this framework that are really, and it's designed to be first and foremost practical and helpful to young people in learning about and thinking about their careers and their futures. And within that, we made a real effort to move beyond a very individualistic conception of career to something that was much more kind of broader and more collective. And so we've got this kind of component of it, which we call see the big picture. And in there, we've put something specifically saying, if you're going to do this well, you've got to think about the relationship between career and the environment. And so we've actually put it in, but I think we can do a lot more than that. It's not just one bullet point within one of these 6 areas. So what I've done here is just very briefly to think about these 6 areas and how we might think about them in the relationship to kind of a green guidance type approach. So in growth throughout life, we might be encouraging people to think about their own impact on the environment and challenging themselves to do more to challenge climate change. When we're talking about exploring possibilities, we might encourage young people to go out and find out about environmental policies and the impact of different occupations, sectors and organizations that they're interested in. When we're talking about managing career, we want to get people to think about how different perhaps climate change scenarios might impact on their career and what kind of responses, both individual responses and collective responses, might you have. If if the climate warms by 2 degrees, you know, what jobs are likely to disappear? How are you going to manage those things? What might be the responses that we might have for that? But then also thinking about creating opportunities, and I'd be really interested in the employer engagement elements of this, moving beyond just bringing in people from, you know, corporations, but actually bringing in environmental activists, NGOs, sustainable businesses, asking them, how did this get started? How do you live? How do you put food on the table? How are you resourced? How does your organization operate? So really kind of exploring some of those things. In balancing life and work, we might want to think about different life and work balances, considering their environmental impacts. I mean, if you live, as I used to, flying around the world, going to lots of different countries all the time, you know, what's the impact of that? How can we square that with an environmental kind of perspective? You know, how might we be doing these things differently? And both thinking about those things individually as kind of moral and ethical choices, but also as political choices and how we set society up. And then finally, we've got this area which is kind of really critical to what we're doing here, which is this big picture, kind of managing, thinking about how we see the big picture. And here we might look at how environmental policies and regulations interact with people's policies and careers. We might learn about the Green New Deal and so on. So I've put various references that I've cited here. I'll put these up on my blog. If you want to get in touch with my blog's called Adventures in Career Development. But I think what I'm trying to say here is that climate change and wider environmental issues are becoming increasingly important for our careers. Organisations, I think, are genuinely struggling with these issues, but we shouldn't really turn to them or expect leadership from them. So we need a kind of critical approach linked to wider considerations of social justice, as that's the best framework for thinking these issues as part of career management. And then career education within schools and then also within universities and other contexts provides an important space within which we can get individuals to think about these issues and think about them not just as abstract issues that they learn about on the television, but things which they can connect to their own life and their own career. Thank you.
Thank you, Tristan, and thank you for taking us through this brief introduction to a whole body of work here. I'll certainly look into this, and I'm sure many UK-based persons and professionals are more familiar with this, but thank you very much for taking us through this, but also the background. And it's interesting to see how our speakers are opposing the idea of the individual career and perhaps trying to see the bigger picture. That seems to be a trend of this. And it's not just about becoming a carbon trader or a green hairdresser. It's actually seeing the bigger picture. Now, we'll turn to a question and answer period. And this is led by our woman behind the scenes, Lynn Barham. You've been picking up a few comments. I'm sure you have some comments of your own as well. I think my role will now be to see whether, with your good help, Lynn, we can get people into a more discussing mode, more exchanges. And I'm sure that you will be able to facilitate that along with me. So let's get that part of the session started.
Yes, well, let's first of all invite people to put anything in the chat. I keep looking to the side because I'm trying to monitor the chat as well as engage with this. And actually, one of our first comments came from Catherine Reynolds, who really went back to one of our first questions about whether there is any evidence to show that young people are actually more likely to apply to jobs in organisations with strong credentials. I don't know whether Catherine's there and wants to expand on that, or whether any of the speakers want to respond. So, Catherine, are you there?
Yes, Lynn, I am here. Thank you very much for picking up my question. And I know from my own practice that it's a very, very strong and powerful theme in students in the universities that I've been working in for the last 20 years. But I just want to know if it's ever been measured officially. Can we point to any research that shows that this is genuinely the case rather than an instinct that we've picked up? I don't know if anyone can respond
Yeah,
to that.
I've got a study that I did recently, which looks at a number of features, and we put environmental policies in there. So it's basically what do you look for when you're looking for a job, and it's mainly university students and graduates we ask this to, and they say lots of things, and one of the things that they would like to see, and generally most people agreed with this one way or another, was that they would like to see environmental policies from businesses. One of the things that was really interesting about that was there was a quite substantial difference between the likelihood of women agreeing with that statement, or the strength of their agreement with that statement, than there was of men. So basically women were a lot more interested in that, which it was interesting to us, particularly in the context of a lot of STEM and engineering type companies, which often struggle to recruit women. And that it occurred to us that one of the issues might be that this issue was more important to women. Why that is, I don't know, but that was something we found. But we haven't got sort of absolute evidence that if you either say or actually are genuinely good at kind of sustainable business, that you recruit a better quality of student. I don't know whether that's true, but what we can say is that it's something students are interested in, and particularly female students.
Thanks, Kristen. And can you point us to that research? Where do we find it?
Yeah, I'll put the link in.
Thank you.
I just want to add one thing to this gender divide. It's fairly common for the literature on climate change and attitudes, beliefs, behaviors to see women to be a lot more involved than men. It's a fairly established gap. Like you're saying, we don't really know why, but there's few hypotheses floating around. But Catherine, to go back to your question, I think it would be challenging for you to find data on that specific question on whether they apply for jobs that have specific characteristics. There's a challenge for universities to keep track of their graduates and where they end up. There's lots of limitations in that field. But if you look at their desires to have careers that have certain characteristics, then there's a lot more research on that, like Tristan's study, another a recent poll that was published in for Italian youth, for example, having a meaningful career was at the top of their concerns. And I know there are other polls like that or larger surveys that indicate that young people of today, they want meaningful careers and find a good strike between personal life and career life, work life.
I don't know how good your Danish is, Catherine, but there's also, I think I mentioned earlier, a Danish report, very recent one, which puts, the environmental issues and the meaningful work linked with that at a top priority in terms of careers choices and career development, and third and second and all the way the rest of them, prestige, salary, interest, and all that would come further down. So I think we can mention, across the world, in fact, quite a few studies of this kind. You might be limited in your Anglo-Saxon way of looking at things and languages, of course, but now we've mentioned Italian and Danish ones.
Mm-hmm. Just adding to that, in case people aren't following the chat, David Morgan has just mentioned in there that in the little resources pack, which you can access through the NICEC website, there is a piece of information from a recent student study about the extent to which people were prepared to take a lower salary in order to work for a better organization. So, that's an interesting one. Right, I'm going to have to read things there. I think one of the interesting things that I've just been thinking about as we've gone through this is that actually I've now got a little kind of 4-bit thing, partly picking on something that Nikki Moore put in about green conditions you know, things like travel to work, recharging points, working from home, those kinds of things. One of the things, the second thing moving around my little diagram, we had this idea of green jobs, and one of the things we wanted to move away from today was just thinking that there are green jobs. And Stefania, right at the beginning, was saying with us, every job is a green job. If you're going to work as a financial advisor, it's a green job, because, you know, not only do your clients have different views on sustainability and how they want their money to be used, but there is the whole issue of what investment is a good idea. What about all this divestment from fossil fuels? What's that going to do to investment patterns in the future? So being aware of that. Thirdly, I've got the idea of sort of really dark green organizations, and I mean, there are people like Patagonia that absolutely stand out there, and surprisingly Unilever becoming much more so. But then the fourth bit in this that I haven't really thought about that is the threat to jobs and careers. So if I choose this particular professional area, is it at risk? Is it something that will disappear as a result of climate change? I don't know whether anybody's got any other thoughts about that. Meanwhile, I'm just going to go and read something about employers, and I'll come back to you again in a minute. Sorry, do if anybody has views on those areas.
Well, if I may, just in terms of preparing young people for careers, my understanding is one of the foundational principles is also to prepare them for shifts in career, because so you mentioned job might disappear, they change. So in my view, like a very strong indicator of lifelong career success is adaptability and the ability of a young person to reinvent themselves and use the skill they acquired in one context and apply them in a different context. So this concept of resilience, the ability to change with the time that change, with the different jobs that appear. So that was just one thought I had while you were mentioning this, the threat that climate change is posing to the existence of certain jobs. And the other element that I'd like to reemphasize is this principle or idea of entrepreneurship, a mindset that not that everybody should be an entrepreneur, but having those kind of skills and the way of thinking of your own career as an entrepreneur, it makes you approach the whole trajectory in a different way. It kind of teaches you certain skills and it makes you more proactive, less passive in your choices. So it's, and I think young people are in a position to create a whole new set of jobs that we cannot even think what they might be at the moment. But it would be really interesting to try and leverage on their creativity, their imagination to come up with those professions that don't exist. So I think that the old way of doing it was to match people to careers. Now what I see the future being in this field is to really allow the person to be totally self-aware as much as possible, in touch with who they are, and then help them define for themselves what these careers are. And maybe they already exist in the world for them to join, or they have to create them for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. If there's no other immediate comment, I'm going to move on to another little exchange started by Wendy Hirsch, raising the question of whether people, including young people, say they're interested, but in fact their behaviour doesn't follow through on this. She gives an example that people say they would like flexible working, but they then actually don't take up the option. And Julia Yates followed up on that, saying that she's writing up a study at the moment that seems to show that students say that meaning matters more to them in careers than it actually does. I'm assuming when she's looking at the career choices they actually make. So do we have any comments on sort of ambition hitting a rather hard wall of reality and salaries? You know, we mentioned earlier the thing that was students in higher education saying they would take a lower salary to work for a good organisation. These two comments are suggesting that may hit a brick wall.
I mean, from my point of view, I don't think that it's. I wouldn't rely too much on the idea that people are going to sort of want to pursue the environment as being their primary motivator for career choice too far. I mean, what I think what we're trying to do when we're talking about these things in curriculum is to raise issues and to do some educative stuff where people think about these issues more deeply. And, you know, ultimately there are going to be, you know, I suppose I'm trying to move away exactly from that idea that a green choice is a kind of is a nice choice about picking your particular values that you feel suit well with you, and move to a situation where we're talking about there are going to be some changes to the labour market, and there are going to be some hard limits on what choices you can take, which are going to be brought about if people don't engage with environmental change more. So yeah, I mean, I'm always skeptical when, I mean, it's nice to hear, isn't it? If you hear that young people are kind of getting more interested in the environment, that they're prioritising those things more. I mean, I think that's good, but they've still got to engage into a system which probably doesn't care about those things very much. And so we've got to give them some way of navigating that system that's about something other than just saying, well, I'll take this particular consumer choice over that one, and one that actually helps them to understand and think about things on a more systemic level.
Mm-hmm.
If I can add to that, is what is being brought up is a classic divide between intention and behavior, and we see that in health behaviors all the time. We all want to be healthy, but then the intention is there, but we actually do it, right? And it comes down to barriers to act. It's a big thing. And what Tristan alluded to is our job would have to be that to break down the barriers so that young people who really want to get into those kind of jobs have the options and the opportunity to do it. So it's not all on the individual to figure out what they want to do, but it's also on the society and the structures and the systems around to enable them to actually achieve their goals, because it's like having them show up to a rally and speak as loudly as they do, but then nobody's listening. It's the equivalent there. You have them figure out what they want to do, and then there's not such a thing out in the real world for them to actually actualize their intentions. So it's kind of a psychological challenge we all have as human beings to act on our intentions, but it's also the true existence of some barriers, and they're bigger and many more for specific groups than others. So it's kind of, again, the individual, societal, shared work and responsibility to make it all happen.
Mm-hmm. And actually, there's a very interesting comment from Morag Walling, just recently made. I don't know whether Morag's happy just to present what she's written in the chat to us. No, would need to unmute probably. Okay, that doesn't seem to be working out. In that case, some really interesting comment from Pete Robertson. Pete, present it yourself.
Sorry, I'm also now available. Apologies.
Okay, this is Morag. So,
Hello. Some of you are familiar with me. I'm Morag Walling. I'm a careers consultant working on embedding employability at King's College London. I was fortunate enough to present at your conference a couple of years ago, and one of the things that I was trying to unpack a little bit was how well we understood as a profession the work of Professor Sarah Jane Blakemore, the neuroscientist. And essentially her findings show that the prefrontal cortex of our brains are less well developed than we thought they were in adolescence. And I think I'm a latecomer to careers work, and one of the things that I was quite sort of intrigued by was almost like how difficult young people seemed to find these things, having previously worked in a school. And what Sarah Jane Blakemore unpacks is the fact that actually decision-making, planning, abstract thinking and social cognition are all things that are impacted by that part of the brain. So it's something that I've started to socialise the ideas of in this space of sort of careers and higher education, careers in particular. But I'm just sort of really interested in terms of perhaps whether that engaging more with that area might help us to look at some of these areas in a slightly different light. Thank you.
thank you. I think we have Pete joining us now.
You want me to come in now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I just thought it'd be interesting to have a quick conversation about politics from the policymaker's point of view. I'm kind of aware career education guidance has historically appealed to the full political spectrum. The right like the fact that we supply skilled workers, and the left like the fact that we try and combat inequality, and people in the middle like the freedom of choice. So there's something for everyone wherever you are on the political spectrum. But some of the Green movement, like I'm talking from Scotland, where the Scottish Green Party is the most left wing of all the mainstream, of all the parties that get elected, really. So they're more interested in left wing economic policies than they are in green issues, actually, in spite of their name. So the two tend to go together. So I think it's I think there's a presentational issue in how we communicate to policymakers a green agenda for guidance that makes it appealing across the spectrum. So I just wondered if folks had any comment on that.
Perhaps one small comment from this side of the water. We don't even have a Green Party because all the politicians are so green you wouldn't believe it. And it's really interesting to see how they're trying, you know, from left to right and up and down, actually to be more green than all the others. All kinds of policies are embedded in green policies just now: economic policies, social issues, educational issues, and it's also seen as a huge asset to our small country. I mean, we hear every day about the export wonder of Danish wind turbines, and also lots of other things. So it's really interesting to see how this has in fact overtaken the traditional left-right divide. I know I'm painting this in very broad terms, but I was thinking, Pete, perhaps that it's a UK discussion very much. I'm sure it is, and I agree with you. It's interesting to see how we unpack these ideas in political terms. But I was wondering whether, in fact, it's very specific to the United Kingdom or perhaps even England. and it might be different in other countries. That's what I'm trying to say in this little intervention here.
I mean, the political nature of what we do is clearly is part of our funding comes from government, so we have to talk to and transact with government inevitably, and the way in which you talk to and transact with government is going to be different within different governments. And so but on this issue, Boris is telling us that he's going to build back better with a green industrial revolution. So, we should be quids in here, really, shouldn't we, if we can convince him it's part of it. But I think, we have to be, I don't know, it's difficult because we have to, I think, both make an effort to understand where different political masters are coming from and to recontextualize our arguments in the context of them, without necessarily compromising what we really think and what we think is really good practice. Now, what I'm proposing in terms of how we handle these things in curriculum is not that, this is just a kind of, sit the class down and put Bernie Sanders on and then you're done. I'm saying that we need to create space within which some of these issues are discussed, and they have to have different, you have to, as part of that, you have to get students thinking about different kinds of answers that different kinds of political traditions offer. And, and just as you have to get them thinking about how different choices that they might make in their career might have different consequences. And so I think we're talking about something where we're getting students to engage in all of those ideas. That doesn't mean, I think, that we should be afraid of sometimes saying that a strong focus on individual choice over collective responsibility has detrimental effects for the environment, because it clearly does, and so we have to kind of try and engage students with those things without necessarily just telling them what to think.
I'm keeping an eye on time here, Lynn, and we have
I think Stefani has a contribution.
Okay.
I will be very quick. I just want to share a bit of my frustration with the political and policy topic in my country. I find that regardless of parties and ideology, what never happens here is that policies are matched with adequate resources to actually give them even a chance to work. So I think that what policy people are in a position to become strong advocates for matching, what they, forgetting what they need to even give a chance to these policies that are created. It's so frustrating to see that all the time you have these fantastic plans and then you don't have any chance to see it work in the field the way they are intended to. And I think that's it's universal across political ideology, at least what I've observed in this part of the world.
But I think if it's okay with you, Lynn, I'll take over from here, and thanks very much for facilitating this Q&A and conversation piece. I'll bring David Morgan into the picture now. I can see you're there. That's it. Thank you very much, David. David is with the CDI Career Development Institute. But David, how green are you?
Not as green as I'd like to be. Still on the journey, I think, which most people probably are. I first became more aware probably back in the 1980s when my dad quit his mechanical engineering job to set up an environment consultancy. Was probably a bit too much of an early adopter, so got some work, but ended up going back elsewhere. But I've been more actively involved the older I've got, and started supporting the Rainforest Foundation in 2004. I'm now a trustee of the Rainforest Foundation. I'm the chair of trustees of a startup environment charity that works in schools to not just educate children about climate change, but also what they can do with their communities to address it, and predominantly to try and alleviate climate anxiety among young people. So, so working with them there. And then in my own life, making as much change as I can without getting divorced, really. So, you know, we've got solar panels, we buy renewable electricity, reducing our travel and my commute, and numerous other things.
But the CDI is engaged in this whole area. Could you unpack the CDI strategy a little bit in these terms?
Well, it's slightly bad timing, actually, because we have a board meeting next week where we're discussing our overall strategy.
Oh,
but
I'm sure you can share some secrets with us.
I can't really tell you what it's going to be yet because it hasn't been agreed. But there is a key strand of it that's being discussed since before I joined. So I joined in April, which is about, you know, sustainability, not just, I think, in the environment sense, but also just more generally. So, you know, making sure we're working towards fairness throughout the system for individuals, and what that means for the environment and so on. So it is definitely one of the things that's in there. Something I'm keen on. Joining the CDI, I could see that there are opportunities for us to do more. But once that strategy is agreed, it's about going through, well, what are the key elements of that we're going to put through a strategic plan. And I'd be very hopeful that there's a strong sustainability element to that.
Just because I'm engaged in Norway, just like Tristan Hooley, for your information, it was interesting to see when we did a green paper on the development of career guidance services in Norway, the very first reference in that particular governmental report was on sustainability issues and green guidance. And I think that it was interesting to see that, you know, a governmental report, in fact, can actually take these steps. This is about 3 or 4 years ago. So I was just encouraging the CDI to be bold and brave here. I was interested also in what you would see as sort of the big areas for career development. We've been looking at the organization have been interested in these dilemmas and issues. So perhaps you could help us along there.
Sorry, you broke up just a little there, Peter. Sorry, would you mind repeating the last part?
All right. This is the thunderstorm and living in the rural area and all that. What would you see as some of the big areas for career development? I mean, we've been looking at these individual aspects, but there's also, and we've been looking at that as well, societal aspects. And you're an organization which tries to serve, if you like, both the society and the individuals and professionals. So I was interested in your steps in this area.
Yes, I think, well, if you think about the sustainability piece, like we're thinking about everything more broadly, it's the impact on the individual, the economy, and society more broadly. So what's the value of career development for the individual, for the economy, for society? And you can play that through again with the sustainability and being greener. I always think of it as you've got your multiple levels, but what can I do as an individual with my own life and my own behaviours? What can I do as part of the organisation I'm in or I work with? So with our employers, with organisations we volunteer with the organisations we work with. So where can we influence and create change? And then how can I help change the behaviours of the people more broadly around me? And I think that's where you know, the career development profession has a fantastic opportunity. We're talking to people at key points in their lives where, you know, they are looking for not just the next job, but what do I do going forward? What's my career? What do I invest my time on this planet in? Because work and, you know, paid and unpaid is one of the biggest things we do. So I think there's a little bit of conversation in the chat about, you know, it's not just young people, it's people in midlife career change. You know, the piece about young people being maybe not following through with some things they say they're more interested in is a real factor, but that does mean there is that idealism, there's this view that can be tapped into when they're relatively young, and as long as you know, you can do that and do that in the right way, then it's about opening up that vista, opening up opportunities. So one of the key things around career guidance anyway is making sure young people are aware of the breadth of opportunities that are out there, not just the narrower view of career opportunities that will come from friends, family, and maybe teachers. So if you take that with a green slant, it's, well, actually, there is a whole green economy that's starting to blossom. So there are real opportunities in the green sector, but there's the greening of traditional jobs. So where are the organisations within banking or within accounting or within, you know, social care or whatever, who are starting to lead the way and being more environmentally conscious? Or where are there those organisations that aren't there yet, but there's a role where you could bring that to the role and you can start greening within an organisation. So I think there's opportunities within, you know, with young people around that idealism to do that. And it goes throughout everyone's careers. But when you start looking at kind of the midlife career change, you know, a lot of people do decide to change their career. There is that giving back element. And I personally, that's been part of my trajectory, is actually it's not about the job and the pay and the title. It's actually what am I doing? What am I investing my time in that means something? So there's again another opportunity there to help people explore what is actually important to you. And I think as Stefani said, you don't want to come in too early with the environment, but if there's you know, a social context, or if people do mention the environment, well, where are those opportunities to get involved? So it's not just I need to move to a job that's a green job. Or I could move to a company that could be more environmentally friendly within its non-green sector, or I could, you know, green within my organisation. But also, how can you volunteer, get involved with, and help organisations that are trying to make a difference, which builds your capability for your career going forward, gives you outside interests that maybe meet that need as well, and also gives capability to organisations that absolutely need it to drive it forward.
On a personal note, the other day, my grandchild said, granddad, your next four-wheel drive truck will be electrical, won't it? He was looking towards that. We had a discussion about four-wheel drive trucks, which of course are needed on farms where I live. But there was an environmental issue, and you know, behind that, of course. And he's 8 years old. There we go. I was wondering about the CDI as an organization to support its members. I mean, you're trying to do a lot of things there, but you're actually a professional organization. What do you do to support this whole area, this industry?
Yeah, I think there are two things. The first thing is we've got to demonstrate our commitment by leading by example. So there's things we need to do internally. You know, we haven't had policies that are about driving sustainability heavily within the CDI, but there are things we can do. So with the pandemic, we've all been working from home, and that's worked effectively. So we're not going to force everyone to go back into the office and do all the commuting, because that's not good for the environment, it's not good for the people, and it doesn't actually add a lot of value. But we'll have a more blended approach. Maintaining the reduction in travel is something I'm really keen on. So when I was in my previous roles, I was looking at how I reduce the commute and reduce the travelling time, particularly by the more polluting means. So looking at those, and there are areas where we can do more on that. You know, some of the obvious ones spring to mind are we have a Careers Matters magazine that goes out every quarter. It's really valued by members, but there are other ways we can do that in a more environmentally friendly way. We produce an awful lot of papers, or have in the past, to support, you know, events and shows and promotions and so on. Well, actually, we're going to be a bit more savvy about that and look at more digital options. So there's lots of little ways we can slice it. But I think in terms of supporting our members, there's a few key things that we can do. We have quite a good platform to be able to raise the profile of issues like this, and we need to use that more to highlight, you know, green issues. And it's not just the issues and the opportunities, but I think it's showcasing where people are doing something really well, building those positive stories that, you know, where are the people in their careers practice who are, you know, really making this work well and really getting some good results. So that's really important. So there's that part of it. There's some specific things we're looking at doing. So our conference in December, the CDI conference in December, will have 6 UN sustainability goals associated with it. So we're going to have a whole theme around the UN sustainability goals to really start that conversation. We are looking at developing a webinar series for late autumn, early 2022 around sustainability. And if anyone has any ideas on what they would like covered in that, please do get in touch with me. Be very happy to hear those. And there's a third one which just escaped my mind that we were working on. Oh yes, there's another one. So we're not working on this at the moment. It's something I'm toying with. You see from a number of organisations things like, green charters or, climate change charters, environmental charters. Is there something worthwhile that we could do for the sector about developing a charter? So, okay, this is what we all are striving towards, all trying to live by. Something that makes sense for career development rather than being just generic. And I think as a professional body, it's that kind of activity where you're raising the profile, you're giving people some good context, you're showcasing the progress and the tools that people can make, and using that to enable people to apply it to their everyday work and life, but also demonstrating it ourselves.
Thanks very much, David, for giving us this insight into your organization and talking about papers and stuff that have not been released yet. Little secrets here. Thank you very much. I was wondering about one comment. This is me talking to Lynn. Charles Jackson actually thinks he's being a bit cynical. He feels that in the UK we get lots of greenwash rhetoric, but very little real action. And we didn't get a chance to comment on that. Are we part and parcel of that greenwash rhetoric? Is this what we're doing today, Lynn? Perhaps if you unmute, I might be able to hear you.
Right. I just wondered if Charles was here to present his viewpoint himself.
Yes, I am here. Did I get that? I'm just still struggling with this technology, one of the big challenges I think is that some businesses do take quite long-term views, but I often feel very disappointed by government in the UK, in the sense that seems to take very short-term decisions. They now nearly 10 years ago, the Labour government had introduced better building standards to make more sustainable houses. They were chucked out by the Tories, giving into the big house builders who didn't want to build slightly more environmentally friendly houses. We're going to build a third runway at London Airport, possibly. We can debate whether HS2 is a good thing or not. We've had lots of targets put forward by governments, but with the Green Home Scheme fell apart. So in Britain, there's lots of ambitious targets that people are supposedly committed to, but I just don't feel I feel we're crawling towards them at the moment. And yet, if we're really going to make a change to sort of education, and if you want, a green, more sustainable agenda to be brought into schools and the career support we give to young people, the backing of government is, action from government is really required. And yet we know, the quality of education, the tightness of resources in schools at the moment means that getting anything actually extra into the curriculum is very difficult. So
thanks very much, Charles. It seems as if we as practitioners and researchers are way ahead of the British government.
Yeah, well, that's not difficult. But we have to. But they have so much power. If whether they fund, they're still funding develop North Sea oil. So. So I'm really disappointed. I think that's a big challenge for careers, is how political we want to be, really, and how and I don't have an answer to that, but I just observe that we seem to be sometime in a bit of a vacuum because of the disappointing performance, and not just of the UK government, of quite a lot of other governments too.
Yeah, and you've opted out of Europe, so you're not with the rest of us now.
Yeah, well, I didn't want to do that.
I know. Just teasing. Our time is up, I'm afraid. This is a very lively discussion. I'm sure we could go on forever, but this was our time slot. I want to thank all the speakers, of course, and people who've made interventions, but in particular, I'd like to thank Lynn Barham, who you put all this together. You made the program, and you've been working on this issue for 25 years. So thank you very much for keeping up the momentum and encouraging the rest of us to actually get together to do this kind of thing. So I'm thanking everybody. I don't think I've mentioned everyone, but my thoughts go out to you.